Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Robert Wittenstein, co-president of Temple Emanu-El, along with my co-president, Edie Disner, who's down in the front row there. We are really pleased to have John Ossoff as one of our Yom Kippur speakers today. As all of you know, John Ossoff is the first Jewish senator from the state of Georgia. And yes, we can applaud that. What you may not know is we're both graduates of the same school, so I feel very close to John. We both went to Padea, and he was a much better student than I was. The headmaster assures me that he was a much better student than I was. John is one of us, right? He grew up here in Atlanta. He is a lifelong Reform Jew. He got interested in politics and trying to make the world a better place at an early age. And he spent years working for his mentor, John Lewis, of blessed memory. And we are delighted that he's here today, and we look forward to his remarks. He has a very tight schedule today, so he's not going to be here for very long, and he's not going to have time for questions. And for that, he is apologetic, but he's got other places he's got to be. So we're delighted he's been able to carve out this time for us, and I would like you all to welcome Senator John Ossoff.
Gmar Tov, Temple Emanu-El, and Shana Tova. Thank you, Robert, for that gracious introduction and for your friendship. Gratitude to Rabbi Spike Anderson, my friend, for his gracious invitation to address the congregation today. Thanks also to Cantor Adesnik, Rabbi Rachel Miller, Rabbi Max Miller, your congregation co-presidents, Robert, and of course also Edie Disner, Vice Presidents Evan Altman, Wendy Frank, Bill Kellert, Ellen Lindeman, the Board of Trustees, the Brotherhood and Sisterhood, and the entire congregation. I am deeply honored by the invitation to address you on this day of all days, the 10th day of Tishrei, as we observe Yom Kippur. Today is a day for reflection, and so my message today is reflective. I think it's hopeful. And it's founded on a conviction that just as we can resolve to live better and kinder and more virtuous lives in the year to come as individuals, together as a community, as a nation, and as a human family, we can build a better world that will last for many years to come. Just as I'm deeply honored to speak here today on Yom Kippur, I'm also deeply honored to serve you and to represent you in the United States Senate. In preparing for today's remarks, I paused to reflect on the events in our state and in our world over this last year. First, let me extend my heartfelt condolences to all of you who have lost friends, family, and loved ones in this last year. More than 650,000 Americans who have died from COVID-19. My heart is with you. May their memories be a blessing. Reflecting on the last year in our state, I reflected, of course, on political events. And I think we all recognize that the election in January was a turning point for our state and for the American South. But in my view, it was a turning point beyond the scope of partisan politics. And for me and for so many Georgians, it was a turning point deeply connected to the intertwined histories of two peoples who have faced persecution and genocide throughout history. Because few, I among them, would have predicted, even as recently as a few years ago, that the state of Georgia, both the heart of the old Confederacy and the cradle of the civil rights movement, would send a black pastor and the young Jewish son of an immigrant to represent our state in the Senate. As Robert acknowledged, we are respectively the first Jew and the first African American to represent Georgia in the Senate, and upon my election, I became the first Jewish senator elected from the Deep South since 1879. My father's grandparents, Israel and Annie Ossoff, came to America from Lithuania in 1911 and 1913, fleeing deadly anti-Semitism in Eastern Europe. When I was sworn into the Senate by Vice President Kamala Harris, I had in my jacket pocket copies of the ship's manifests that logged their arrival at Ellis Island. What happened in Georgia this year represents the historic alliance between blacks and Jews in the South, an alliance that was vitally important during the Civil Rights Movement and which Congressman John Lewis urged me and all of us to sustain. The first time I sat down for a meal with my mentor, Congressman Lewis, nearly 20 years ago, that's what he wanted to talk to me about. How blacks and Jews had marched together and sat in together at the height of the movement in the 1960s. How a people that withstood centuries of colonialism, genocide, and slavery were tied to a people who endured bondage, exile, pogroms, and Holocaust. How our alliance was vital, but couldn't be taken for granted, and required commitment across generations. And so with those Ellis Island ship's records in my pocket documenting how Israel and Annie landed in America over a century ago, and with Congressman Lewis' words echoing in my mind, as I was sworn into the Senate, I placed my hand on a Tanakh that had belonged to a Georgia rabbi named Jacob Rothschild. Rabbi Rothschild had led the temple in Atlanta for decades, the temple where I was bar mitzvahed. And it was while Rabbi Rothschild led the temple in 1958 that the temple was bombed by white supremacists in retaliation for the rabbi's alliance with Dr. King. The day after that bombing, Dr. King sent an urgent telegram to President Eisenhower, calling for an emergency White House conference on race relations that Dr. King said, quote, could revive for the citizens of our country and the freedom-loving peoples of the world the great American heritage of justice, law, and order, and could help recommit our nation to the peaceful settling of differences, which is the only method consistent with constitutional democracy. Dr. King's words after the temple in Atlanta was bombed, to, quote, recommit our nation to the peaceful settling of differences, which is the only method consistent with constitutional democracy. That revival and that recommitment were necessary in 1958, and they're necessary today. If the rabbi will indulge me as I stray into your lane, Yom Kippur being a day for reflection and reckoning and atonement and recommitment, it's fitting to take stock today of the threats to pluralism, to tolerance, to democracy, to peaceful coexistence in our society and around the world. Threats not just lurking and rising, but already at crisis levels. As I'm sure is true for many of you, not all of my ancestors made it out of Europe before it was too late. And once it was too late, just a few escaped. I'll never forget as a young boy tracing with my index finger the numbers tattooed into the arm of my cousin, Nate Krugman. We called him Great Uncle Nate. Numbers etched into his skin upon arrival at the Vevara concentration camp in Estonia. And I was trying to grasp with my child's mind some comprehension of how that horror could be possible. Uncle Nate and some of his friends had bolted from a work party beyond the camp's fence, hiding and foraging in Baltic forests for months until he reached Soviet troops. Eventually contacted our family in America, joined them here, and built a vibrant life. But most of those who hadn't come earlier never got the chance. My generation was raised with the words, "never forget," pressed into our minds. And so when at Pope High School in Marietta, Georgia, a swastika and a tribute to Adolf Hitler are scrawled on school walls during Yamin Noraim, our days of awe, no less, it must inflame in us the same passion for the survival of our people that burned in the hearts of the generation that emerged from the Shoah and built a future for the Jewish people here in America, around the world, and in the land of Israel. 2 weeks ago, I returned home from Israel. COVID restrictions prevented me from getting out to spend time with my Israeli family, Orthodox Jews who made Aliyah about 10 years ago. But it was a profound experience to arrive in the Holy Land representing the United States as a Jewish member of Congress. In Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, I met with Prime Minister Bennett, President Herzog, and Foreign Minister Lapid. Prime Minister Bennett, having lived in New York, shared in our nation's surprise at the nature of the new representation for our state in the Senate. The new Israeli leadership asked me to convey their regards to the Jewish community here in Georgia. And in Ramallah, I spoke at length with Prime Minister Shtaya of the Palestinian Authority. I met with ordinary Israelis and Palestinians yearning for an end to war. Reminded, as always, when we visit the region, of Israel's vulnerability, of the vital importance of our alliance, of the necessity of strong U.S. leadership to ensure Israel's long-term security. And while the situation remains intensely challenging, and my optimism is cautious, there is a new atmosphere of possibility in the region, and a new and promising tone in the relations between Israel and the United States. It was a deliberate choice that my first mission as a member of the Senate was to the Middle East, and it won't be long before I return. I'm working to build the open, honest, and trusting personal relationships necessary to help advance a U.S. foreign policy that will hasten the day when all who live in those lands live with security, with peace, with prosperity, and with freedom. That is a mission founded on the same values that sustain America's place as an inspiration to the world: inalienable rights bestowed by God of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those are the promises that still draw dreamers and strivers and pioneers from all over the world to our shores. About a month ago, I was on a flight to Springfield, Illinois, Lincoln's hometown. And I was sitting across the aisle on this little regional jet from a young Lithuanian woman. She was on the final leg of her journey to live for a year in rural Illinois, full of excitement to be in America, dreaming about opportunities she could pursue and maybe even the life that she could build here. And I just couldn't get over the fact that this young woman who decided to come to America, who was sitting right across the aisle from me, was from Lithuania. She reminded me of Annie and Israel Ossoff. They came to this country at about her age. She reminded me of my own mother, who immigrated alone to America as a young woman, just 23 years old. My mother came to this country because she believed in this country. She still does, and so do I. So on this Yom Kippur, as we reckon with the last year and resolve to live better lives in the year to come, it's with gratitude that I'll continue to serve you. I will continue the work aimed at more fully realizing America's founding promises. And I'm at your service. Shana Tova. Thank you again, Rabbi Anderson. Thank you all for your time and hospitality today.
I know there's still some schmoozing going on, which is exciting, and we're grateful for that. I want to make sure that you have time for that, but also want to give Dov lots of time to speak as well. So I'm Edie Disner, co-president of Temple Emanu-El with Robert Wittenstein, and I am honored today to introduce to you Dov Wilker, who has been the regional director of American Jewish Committee in Atlanta since 2011, which seems like it was just yesterday, but it wasn't. So he has also served as AJC's National Director for Black Jewish Relations since 2018. He has earned his international MBA from Tel Aviv University. I missed him while he was there. I knew him before and happy to welcome him home. He worked for an Israeli startup software company, and he started his career at the Israel Ministry of Foreign Affairs, where he, in the Southeast United States, and then he served as AJC's assistant director, which is when I got to know Dov. He is currently a Wexner Field Fellow, a board member of the Atlanta Jewish Film Festival, an advisory board member for the Atlanta Ballet, which I'm pretty sure his daughters are excited about. He's on the Human Relations Commission for the City of Atlanta. He has been recognized as one of the 40 under 40 by the Atlanta Jewish Times and the Atlanta Business Chronicle. And he received the Asian American Heritage Foundation's Distinguished Service Award. Dov is married to Julie, and they have two beautiful daughters. I am fortunate to know Dov and his family and to be able to call them my friends. I am certain that he never anticipated that the first Jewish senator from Georgia would be his opening act.
Edie, if there is one thing that we can agree on, is I never expected Senator Ossoff to open for me. So thank you very much, Senator. It's a true honor. I'm actually not sure who was more excited, me or my mother, who would have come with me today, except she's watching my girls, so I guess thank you, Mom. Well, Shana Tova, everyone. It is an honor to be with you on the holiest of holy days, Yom Kippur, a day that holds special meaning to me, and I hope to all Jews in the United States and around the world. Because as was mentioned by Senator Ossoff, as mentioned through the liturgy that we read, Yom Kippur is a day of reflection, a day of atonement. And what better topic to discuss on a day of reflection than anti-Semitism? And what more important instances in our society do we have to think about on a day like today than what we saw last week? But really, the week spanned. It began last week physically, but merged into this week because the incident at Pope High School, unfortunately, was not the only incident in Cobb County. In fact, because of copycats, there was an incident at Lassiter High School just earlier this week. The same thing. Hail Hitler, scribbled swastikas. Now, as we think about the state of our society, I actually think back to a period of time that I did not know, because I'm too young to remember. And that is of communist Russia. And why do I bring up communist Russia in relation to two incidents that took place this week in Cobb County? So how many of you are familiar with the term Zionism is racism? Anybody know where the term Zionism is racism originated? The where? Durban. In fact, it was not at Durban. It was before that. It actually originated through the Soviets. See, in the 60s and in the 70s, the United Nations was discussing ways to define anti-Semitism. And the Soviets weren't happy with that, because it was going to be defined as a form of racism. And the Soviets were fearful of what that would mean for them. And so the KGB at the time instigated a number of attacks, of anti-Semitic attacks, of graffiti, of vandalism throughout Europe. But what surprised them was not what they had planned. It was actually the copycats that took place. You see, what they opened was a jar that we thought had closed after the end of the Shoah. They instructed KGB to vandalize Jewish institutions. And what happened was, ordinary Europeans began vandalizing them as well. See, the history that we have faced is so important to the way that we view the world today. And too often we forget our history. We aren't read enough. We aren't studied enough. We think that what's happening today might be unique. Now, we, as a Jewish community, know better. We're not surprised. Sadly, we're not surprised. And the reason we're not surprised is because the ebbs and flows of Jewish history is all about people trying to kill us, people who hate us. It is sadly the reason that one of the reasons I believe that really differentiates us as Jews is because of that history, because we read the Torah on an annual basis. Our ability to continue studying our history, to learn from our experiences, to commemorate situations like the Shoah, that is what differentiates us. That is what drives us forward. So I work for an organization called American Jewish Committee. AJC was founded, in fact, in response to the anti-Semitism of the Tsarist Russian regime. See, in 1906, there were the pogroms taking place in Kishinev. And at the time, American Jewish businessmen, philanthropists, industrialists felt that they had a responsibility, as well as connections, to advocate on behalf of Jews in Tsarist Russia. So they used their access, they used their relationships, they used their networks to advocate for those Jews. And what was the result of that advocacy? Sanctions. Sanctions by the US government on the Tsarist regime. But it wasn't just protecting Jews that was important to us. The first time that AJC advocated for a non-Jewish group, 1913. 7 years after our founding, AJC advocated to end anti-Black discrimination in New York, in public accommodations, resorts, and amusement parks. That resulted in the passage of a law that served as a model to other states. You see, we know that our advocacy has always been about the community, because we believe that for us to have an impact, for us to survive, we also need to protect the rights of other minorities. So when Senator Ossoff speaks about black-Jewish relations and the message of Congressman Lewis, it's a present-day message that impacts us. But it also forces us to reflect on our history. So today's September 16th. So September 22nd, next week, the United Nations will come together to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the UN Conference Against Racism, the Durban Conference. Anybody remember the Durban Conference from 2001? Quick show of hands. A handful of you, right? Well, I'm glad that I will be able to add so that when you walk out of here today, everybody will be able to share about that. Because what took place in the week prior to 9/11 was one of the most disgusting acts of sponsored anti-Semitism that we have ever seen. See, the United Nations brought together this conference to discuss ways that they could end racism. It was important to addressing the issues of slavery and identifying those who have faced discrimination like the Roma that are not often spoken about. But what actually took place at that conference, in addition to those positive things, were signs that said, what if Hitler was right? It equated Israel to the apartheid state. It said that Israel was responsible for ethnic cleansing. Now, we should also not forget that this is at the height of the Second Intifada. And in fact, some of those signs, some of that anti-Semitism was in fact sponsored by Osama bin Laden's family themselves. It was so fearful that in fact at one point when the Jewish delegates at the conference, at an NGO conference, got up to walk out, they had to have security to protect them. They were fearful of walking up and down the aisles because people were going to come and physically abuse them. For what? Because they were Jews? Because they dared say that Israel was not an apartheid state? Because they dare challenge the notion that anti-Semitism still existed? In fact, what happened 20 years ago has truly become a part of the fore of anti-Semitism that you see often sadly, from the radical left today. In fact, many of those messages have become emboldened. But as we bring it to the present and we think about anti-Semitism in our society, right, what we are seeing in Cobb County, what we have seen throughout the state, what we have seen across the United States, also has examples of anti-Semitism from the far right. In fact, the other day, I was meeting with a senior elected official of the United States. And one of the aspects of the work that we do at American Jewish Committee is meeting with elected officials to explain anti-Semitism to them. Because we as a community, have failed. We have not done enough to educate our elected officials, our community leaders, about what anti-Semitism is. In fact, there is a definition of anti-Semitism that we have. But I'm sharing this definition and I'm sharing this wonderful tool. Yes, I've got some takeaways for you. It's a glossary of anti-Semitism. And so I say to this person, anti-Semitism doesn't just come from the right, it doesn't come from the left, it's not from religious extremists. I said, we've got this handy glossary here for you so that when anti-Semitism arises in your community, you are able to more effectively respond. And the response that I got back was, well, I'm a great supporter of Israel. It wasn't an acknowledgement that anti-Semitism is thriving. It was an acknowledgement that they support Israel. And I said to them, thank you. That's really important. I really appreciate that. We really appreciate it. But we need you to also understand that anti-Semitism is not just anti-Zionism. That is one element of what we are facing today. And they cordially nodded. Then a few minutes later, the meeting was over. About a month ago, the FBI released their annual hate crimes report. This number was highlighted. 57.5. 57.5. That is the percentage of religious-based hate crimes that target Jews. Nearly 60% of all religious-based hate crimes target Jews. Now, yes, we report at a higher level. That's one of the things that we do well. If we take the example of what happened in Cobb County, we made sure that people were aware. The AJC wrote about it twice. There was a story on WSB, there was a story in CNN. We made sure that people knew about it. But the problem is that of cities that have 100,000 plus people, did you know that 80 of them don't report hate crimes at all? I mean, just until last year, the state of Georgia didn't have a hate crimes law. We have a responsibility. But it's not just about the number of incidents that we have, it's also about how we feel. So here's two other numbers for you. 88, 62. 88, 62. 88 is the percentage of American Jews who feel that anti-Semitism is a problem. That means that 12% of our community doesn't feel it's a problem. You know, considering how many shuls we have, I guess that's not surprising, right? People have lots of ways that they define things. But 62% is the way that the general public views it. That's non-Jewish Americans. 62%, only 62%. As good of a job as we are not doing a good enough job. I can stand in front of the television camera all day long. But if we're not talking with our non-Jewish friends about it, they're probably not hearing about it. My Facebook feed and my Twitter feed over the last 24 hours have been beautiful. Lots of messages of Gmar Chatima Tova, wishing people easy and meaningful fasts. That's a wonderful thing. But what it also says to me is that I live in a bubble, that my social media is a bubble. Now, it's a bubble in part because it's curated as such. But it's a bubble because as many non-Jewish friends as I have, I still need more. We all need more. We need to utilize our access in our places of work, with our friendships in schools, to ensure that people understand that anti-Semitism is a problem. There's one more statistic I want to show you. 24%. 24% of American Jews are fearful of going out in public wearing something that identifies them as being Jewish. And the number's higher if you dig into the data as you get younger. Well, you don't get younger, it's the people get younger who are polled. 24%, up to 41% for people between the ages of 18 to 31. I'm good on time. I want to leave time for questions, by the way. How are we demonstrating how proud we are to be Jewish? One of the key elements for combating anti-Semitism is not just being defensive. It's not just responding to these incidents that we see. It's being on the offense. It's showing people that we're proud to be Jewish, that we are not afraid. In fact, I wear my kippah out in public, not because of my level of religious observance, but because I want people to identify me as being Jewish. Because I'm not afraid. But if I, as somebody who is not afraid, won't wear a kippah, then how can I ask somebody who is afraid to do it? How can we ask our young leaders, the high school students, the kids on college campuses, the young adults in their professional workspaces, how can we ask them to be proudly identifiable as Jewish? if I won't wear one myself? The call to action is not just about how we educate people about the anti-Semitism that we see. The call to action is that we embrace the elements of Judaism that we love and that we share them with people. As we sit here together in a shul on Yom Kippur, I know that each of you is proud to be Jewish. But when you leave here, when you go home, when you go visit your family and friends, how are they sharing their pride to be Jewish? One of the challenges that we face as a community today is that many people believe that Jews are white. Now, I believe that Jews benefit from white privilege, but the moment that we are identified as white, it's a moment that we lose out on our Jewish identity. And it also puts us in a group of people for whom many don't like us. But see, we have to share our Jewish pride, our Jewish culture, our Jewish history. I am sad to admit in front of all of you that my Jewish history and my knowledge of Jewish and Israel history is fairly strong from 1900 until the present. But what about the 1,000 years before? What about the influence that we had around the world? From philosophy to education to mathematics and science. We're very proud of the number of Nobel Prize winners that we have that are Jewish. But how familiar are we with our European Jewish history, the vibrancy that we felt, that we experienced? What about our North African or our Middle Eastern Jewish history? I'm sure that you all know that 850,000 Jews were expelled from the Middle East and North Africa after the founding of the State of Israel. But how much more about those societies do you know? When you travel abroad, do you visit the synagogues? And not just in Eastern Europe or throughout Europe that were destroyed because of the Holocaust. When you go to Latin America, when you go to Japan, how many of you, by the way, have been to the Jewish Community Center in Japan? I was expecting this to be a small amount. Okay. So I had the privilege of traveling a number of years ago as a guest of the government of Japan. You know, Japan is very proud because they have very little anti-Semitism. In fact, they require the teaching of the Diary of Anne Frank. And I went to visit the Jewish Community Center, happened to be there over Shabbat. And it's a beautiful building that sadly has security because all of our buildings have security, because we know that they have to have security. But the Jewish history of Japan is not about expats, is not just about the story of expats who have moved to Japan. In fact, it is about a growing Japanese Jewish community. In China, because they resettled many Holocaust refugees, there's a growing Chinese Jewish community. Right? Our history as a diaspora is a story that we need to do a better job of sharing. But we also have to recognize that we have an opportunity once again. Because every day when anti-Semitism rears its ugly head, because it does every single day, in fact, that number, 57.5, comes because there's nearly 3 anti-Semitic attacks a day in the United States, on average. But we have a responsibility to respond to those whenever we see them. But one of the things that Cobb County showed us is we need to engage. We need to be engaged. So we're fortunate to be joined by Senator Ossoff. But know that advocacy is not just about our federally elected officials. How many of you know your school board members? Right? The Cobb County School Board was supposed to meet today. And frankly, if the incident had not happened, they would have met today. Right? How many of you know your city council members? Well, we live in Dunwoody. We're in Sandy Springs or Dunwoody here? We're in Sandy Springs. But we know our Sandy Springs and Dunwoody city council members, right? But do you know your Chambly, Johns Creek? Do you know your county commissioners? Do we know our state representatives and state senators? Right? Who is it that we actually know? Who are the people that we were actually talking to? Right? We can't leave it up to other people. One of the reasons I feel so fortunate to be in the job that I am in is because I love what I get to do, because I like to talk to people. I feel very fortunate that from the age of 6, I've been an active and proud Zionist. That's another word, by the way. How many of you describe yourselves as Zionists? And not, I wasn't expecting to raise a hand. Yes, show your hands again. How many of you are proud to be Zionists? Okay. How many of everybody who raised your hands, how often do you tell people that you are proud to be Zionist? Okay, right? Sometimes. It's in my Twitter bio. I know, it's in my Twitter bio. Who really cares? But in fact, I just realized it's not in my actual bio that Edie read, right? Like, sometimes we recognize where we have missteps. So thank you, Edie, for allowing me to recognize and to repent and to atone in front of all of you that I will now add it to my personal bio. But that's important as well. At the end of the day, what matters, the difference that we were able to make, is by the people we were able to connect with. It's personal relationships. It's about your elected officials. It's about religious leaders. It's about ethnic leaders. It's about the people that matter in your life. Because if the people that matter in your life don't know how you feel, then how can we expect to prevent these things from happening in the future? Thank you so much, Rabbi Spike, Rabbi Max, and Rabbi Rachel, and Cantor Lauren for having me here today. When I received the email invitation from Edie, or the phone call, it was a phone call from Edie, I was delighted and honored to be asked to join you today. Because sharing about these important issues on Yom Kippur, as I said in the beginning, I can't think of a better way to spend my day. Gmar Chatima Tova. I'm available for any questions.
Is this mic? Yes, and the mic is on. I'm going to invite anybody that wants to come forward and ask questions. Just please keep your mask on your nose and your mouth.
By the way, I can keep going. I mean, I got lots of stuff to say. I didn't include all of it, but I want to make sure I left time for questions. Yeah, Robert.
So you talked about getting to know your state representatives and your city council members and your county commissioners. What's the best way to do that? How do you get to know the people who are your elected officials?
One of the things I love about the work that I do is that it's not rocket science. But it's important to share because I think it's something that intimidates a lot of folks. So all you have to do is pick up the phone and call them or email them. Now, they're not always the most responsive, right? Our leaders are not, we hope that they would respond better. But they want to hear from you, especially when you're their constituent. Their information is publicly available. So the easiest thing to be able to do is to reach out to them. Now, I will say, it's Yom Kippur, I'm not going to say that. I think it's important for us to know, though, that they want to speak to you. And if, by the way, their staff, Senator Ossoff was here. Greg, how many staff members did he have with him? Like 3? I saw 3, right? So 3 or 4. So meeting with their staff is as important, right? Especially for our state and our federal. The staffers are the ones who make things happen. They're the ones who pass the information along. we're all fortunate that Senator Ossoff is Jewish, so he knows about anti-Semitism. He experiences it on the campaign trail. But the other members, they don't know. And so meeting with their staff is very important. And being involved with organizations like American Jewish Committee helps to facilitate that as well.
Okay, so if I presented to you that you had tomorrow 500 local Jews who were eager to persevere and make roads against anti-Semitism, what would you do with that?
Okay. So we have this, so I talked a lot about elected officials, and that's actually the direction that I'm going to go. So as I've shared, our elected officials don't know anything about anti-Semitism, right? And I would invite them to join us in meeting and explaining anti-Semitism to all of them. There are 274 members of the Georgia State Legislature, right? We need to meet with every single one. In the county commissions through DeKalb, Fulton, Cobb, Gwinnett, along with the city council members, through all of them, there's about another 60. Every single one of them needs a touch point and a meeting to explain to them what anti-Semitism is and what they can do about it. And that is the number one answer that I would do with 500 people, Rabbi.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
I got other ideas too.
Yeah,
You want other ideas?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Other ideas. Another idea is how we communicate on social media about anti-Semitism. Right? One of the failures, actually, that I did find about what happened is that I only saw it through, in Cobb County, I saw it through 2 people. I think I have 2,000 friends on Facebook. I saw 2 people post about it. I saw lots of comments on those 2 people. But when I looked even further to see how many shares there wasn't a lot of shares. Right? It's about amplifying the message. So microphones are a great example, right? If I stand back here, you can hear me just fine. But as I get closer to the microphone, the message gets louder and louder and louder. Nobody wants to hear me that loud. Social media and sharing about incidents of anti-Semitism works the exact same way. We can't just comment on someone else's post on Facebook. We have to send it to our friends. We have to share it. We have to tag people. We have to be proactive about ensuring that people see it. We do it better than anyone else. I was meeting with a member of the African American community who made a terribly anti-Semitic comment a number of years ago that just became public. And one of the comments that he said to me was, as he was apologizing sincerely, which is a whole different thing, he said, I don't feel like we have the same representation and support in the black community that the Jewish community has for racism as the Jewish community has for anti-Semitism. We do a good job. There is a reason why the Jewish community is so involved with ethnic and religious communities, because they want to see what we have done and how we have done it to raise awareness of our issues so that they can do it for theirs. And when they see what happens, it develops lifelong relationships, but it also educates them on how to amplify their message. So I think the amplification of the message is extraordinarily important and is sadly too often gets missed. All right, I got one more for you, okay? We have to be proud to be Jewish. We have to. We have to show people. We can't hide ourselves. I go back to the kippah. I go back to the Star of David that we might wear. My younger brother, my father passed away 7 years ago. My younger brother got a tattoo, still can't believe it, of a chai. It's just the word chai. Now, I hope he's watching. I'm not sure if my mother told him to watch.
How do you spell it?
How do you spell chai? He spelled it correctly. But everybody can see the tattoo. If you have a tattoo of Jewish letters, of Jewish words, of Hebrew, that's important. It's another way to demonstrate it, right? Because it all goes back to how we show who we are and what we care about. Oh, I got a fourth one. What my bio didn't say was that I made Aliyah. My wife and I made Aliyah about in 2009 after having, and we had lived in Israel for a number of years. You got to go to Israel. You got to go. I know COVID now, but you got to go. You got to make it a priority to go. It saddens me every day when I think about it that my childhood best friend, for the 5+ years that I lived in Israel, never once came to visit. Didn't come. Wasn't important to him. Forget the fact that he didn't want to see me. That's a whole different story. But he didn't want to go to Israel. He didn't want to see the history. He didn't want to feel the land. He didn't want to taste the food. In fact, in today's paper, how many of you get the printed version of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution? Okay. How many of you have looked at today's issue? Okay. How many of you read the story that said, I think it said food from Israel? Right? What are you going to do with that? How are you going to share that with people? Right? We have and by the way, only one of whom was Jewish. Of the 3 Israeli chefs that they profiled, only one of them was Jewish. How are you going to share that with people? It's not, I apologize for saying this in a shul on Yom Kippur, it's not only about religion, right? It is about our history, it is about our culture, it is about the way that we connect to the words in the books, in the prayer books, right? The Machzor is written in a way of repetition. We have our values. How are we sharing our values with others? That's what we need to take. That's how we have to move forward. So the 4 things, again, so that I don't forget them myself. 1 was connect with your elected officials. Happy if you do it with us. 2nd was amplifying the message through social media and through your networks. 3 was about being proud to be Jewish. And 4th was about your connection to Israel. And none of those are in a particular order. It just happened to be how I remembered them. Other questions, comments, concerns, disagreements? I'm happy to have people disagree with me, too.
I enjoyed your talk. I was wondering if you could comment on something that maybe I just lack knowledge on, and maybe you briefly commented it when you made your statement about how blacks perceive Jews with regard to just being white. I've been a little bit involved with AJC. I've been to one of your national meetings in D.C., and I was at your meeting many months ago that dealt with Jewish-black relations. Okay. It's kind of the last big event that I've been to with a lot of people at COVID. And my perception there was that the black community there was a much older community. Now, it might have been the nature of the event and that type of thing, but there was an appreciation amongst that community of how involved the Jewish people were with civil rights. My perception amongst the young black population, and I could be wrong, is I don't sense that. I don't sense that they understand that history of Jewish-black relations, of how involved we were, that some of our struggle is similar to some of their struggle, and that I get the sense sometimes maybe of, I don't know if it's whiteness or even resentment of Jewish success or whatever it might be, and I've just had problems coming to grip with it. I've seen some of the things on AJC reports about, young Jewish and young blacks groups and going away, so I understand a little bit that's going on, but I'm talking about in a much broader sense. You hear comments about a former president's book on Israel apartheid, so I was wondering if you could just comment on that, because
Happy to, David. Thank you, David. So I also want to clarify, actually, it's not specific to the black community that views Jews as white. It is a societal issue. Jews all too often are viewed as white. And in today's day and age, especially where we are speaking a lot, where you hear people often speak about oppressor and oppressees, Jews are often lumped into the category of oppressors. And it's a way for them to lump us in vis-a-vis Israel specifically, but also in a status perhaps that we have achieved in society. It is almost as if people forget or don't know about the fact that there were quotas for the longest times on where Jews on Jews in academia, Jews in clubs. I mean, the reason that there's the standard club is because Jews weren't allowed into any of the other private clubs. So that's one thing, and I believe that is it leads to a misnomer that most people believe in America that all Jews are of Eastern European descent. Like, it's the way they view us, in part because of the way that the role that we have played in media, I would actually live, and sort of modern day culture. But in fact, right, we know that 50% of Jews are not white. And, whether they come from the Middle East, North Africa, they come from Africa, they come from Latin America. I mean, we know and recognize that, or whether they're African American, they're Asian American, right, whether they have converted or not, right? Jews of all hues, I think is the way that the phrase is, right? So we know that we are a very diverse community. We often fail to educate people around that. In fact, one of the elements around Black-Jewish relations that we've been working very hard on is elevating and amplifying the voices of Black Jews, in part because the Black community doesn't understand their own religious diversity. The Black community in Atlanta doesn't actually realize that 50% of Muslims in Atlanta today are actually African American. One of the most prominent Muslims in America is an African American imam who is from Atlanta. So it is a little bit more of a nuance that we have to spend on time educating people around. Now, as it relates to the older community versus the older generation versus the younger generation, I think that we continue to have a lot of work to do. There is a certain element, there's a certain group within the Black community that is very aware of the Jewish participation in the civil rights movement, and there is many who are not. In the younger generation, it mirrors, right? There are many who see what happened between Senator Ossoff and Senator Warnock and say, look at that Black-Jewish partnership that both senators speak very openly about. And we, as a community, spoke openly about. But I'm not sure how often that message was amplified specifically in the Black community. I worry, what I worry about for the future, though, for the present and for the future, is more along the lines of radicalization of society and the impact that has on younger people than I do on the nature of the relationships. Because I believe there are many people who are active in trying to strengthen the individual relationships. But we have to use the medium that we have. In fact, it was BET hosted a program about a month and a half ago on Black Jews. Right? Now, I don't know who watches BET. I know I watch TV and local TV when Greg Bluestein is on TV. But otherwise, I'm watching Netflix. So when you're on TV, you turn it off? Yeah. But I think it's important that we recognize that we have to get the message to where, I strongly believe, right, we have to get the message to where people are. I love, by the way, and congratulations on the transformation of the sanctuary and the shul as a whole. It is so beautiful and welcoming, and the moment that I walked in, I having been here before, I noticed the difference. The glass, the way the rooms are flowing together, that you can see the natural light coming through, right? We create welcoming environments, and we need to bring people to those welcoming environments. And we also have to go to those welcoming environments. So it works both ways for us, right? Bringing people here, establishing the relationships ourselves, as well as bringing it to where people might be. I hope I somewhat answered your question.
Okay. Now, this isn't a question, it's become a statement, much connected to what David said and what you were just saying. I work in lots of institutions in Atlanta, Georgia. I work for the High. I've done some teaching in public schools. I've been to all these kinds of institutions. And many of those institutions are now emphasizing Black history.
Mm-hmm.
However, in all those Black history things, they're not at all talking about what role Jews had in Black history, and even worse, the people who teach it don't know it.
So, I had the honor of, I agree with you, Karen. I had the honor one night of having dinner with Lonnie Bunch, who is the secretary of the Smithsonian Institute. And at the time I had dinner with him, he was the founding director of the Smithsonian Institute for African American History, Smithsonian Museum for African American History and Culture. Quick show of hands, who's been to that Smithsonian Museum? Okay, on your next visit to DC, you have to go. You have to go. And one of the things that we were discussing at dinner was, and it was before I had gone to visit the museum and toured the museum, I think I'd asked, well, is there any part of the museum that talks about the Jewish role in the civil rights movement? And he said, no, there's not. Because the museum is about the African American history and culture. And then I said, well, I'm hoping that you had significant financial support from the Jewish community from this museum. And the answer was, no, we didn't. And that really saddened me and surprised me, in fact. And the reason I share that story is I think it's important that we recognize that there are times where our message should be included, and there are times when it should not be included, and there are times when we have to recognize that we have been removed from the story, right? So it's three different elements to it. And while I believe it is important that we speak about the Jewish involvement in the civil rights movement, I'm never surprised when it is not, except within Jewish audiences. And our responsibility, I really do believe, is when we are visibly removed from those stories. So the movie Selma visibly removed Rabbi Heschel from the march, from one of the marches. And that's a significant error, right? That is no pun intended, that is the whitewashing of history. That is where our outrage should be placed. I believe that the African American community, that Black history, we have not done a good job. I'm originally from New Jersey. I only went to 2 years of public school in New Jersey. I do believe that we did not do a good job speaking about our Black history. I don't believe we did a good job necessarily teaching about the uniqueness of our history as a whole. And I believe that's something that we need to do better at. But we also need to do a better job of speaking about our own history within the community.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for being here. And to Dove, we're going to start with our healing service here. And Dove has some freebies and some great materials outside. And we'll be in the lobby for a few minutes if you want to continue to chat. Thank you.
Wait. I really appreciate you having me today, and it's wonderful to see all of you. So thank you very much. Shana Tova and Gemar Tov.
drummer will probably be on to the side. So we can probably
Singing or not? Yeah, tell me about it. Okay. He is taller than I am. 1, 2.
good without it? Without. Okay. 1, 2. How about the guitar? Say again? I'm probably going to use the other guitar, but we'll fix that. Should you want to make sure that one's working?
Okay. Great. Do not touch. I like do not touch. Okay. Very good. Sure, I can say anything you want me to say. How's that? You're really going to tell a rabbi to start talking?
Avinu Malkeinu. Guitars, Kurt. Avinu Malkeinu. Okay. You'll get the guitar loud enough when it needs to be. Okay. Because most of it's going to be okay. Maybe I should get the other guitar and make sure that's set. Okay. I'm going to stand right over here? Yeah, okay. Let me get the other guitar.